Hey, welcome back. We are going to be going after episode number 22,
22.
and we're going to be probably stepping into this where more than we want to, but it's not my fault. It's Mike's fault. That's
It's
all
your
I know.
opinion. We're not stepping into anything more than we want to. On
Yeah,
occasion, when I
right.
go up, we have a dog, and on occasion, the dog leaves piles in the yard. We call them bombs. And my
Thank you for
grandson,
sharing.
whom I love dearly, will on occasion aim for a pile and stomp on it so it squishes out in every direction. And he
Oh,
finds that delightful fun. So on occasion, you and I could be similar to Colton in that we find piles
that's just
and we
sad.
go over and stomp on them
Oh, no.
just for the sheer fun of watching everyone around us shriek and teach
Okay.
them that we have done something wrong.
So today we are going to be in podcast 22, episode 22. We're going to do something that probably is going to get us in real trouble. But
Take
we're
the
going to
word
talk
probably
about.
off. You do not need to add adverbs where they're inappropriate. This is not probably going to get us in trouble. This is going to get us in trouble.
So today we're going to talk about the living community of Jesus,
Not
which,
capital letters.
not capital letters, which is the commercial church is dying out, but it doesn't really matter. Really? It doesn't really matter. So, okay, where is this coming
All right,
from?
let's go back to the
And
title
how does
because
this?
I think the title matters.
Okay.
This podcast is coming as the age of COVID is slowly coming to a close. Not
Dissipating, right.
instantaneously, but today on the news or yesterday on the news, the comment was made maybe by the end of summer, the rules about wearing a mask are going to be changed so that outside people will no longer to need to be masked up. Inside, they probably still will need to be masked, and that's in the fall. We're seeing the end of the COVID age and what that has done to the schools, what it has done to businesses, what it's done to restaurants, what it has done to government, to judicial, legal situations. We understand all of that, but it also has had major impact on the church. And one of the
It
things
is.
that we observe, this is somewhat informal. We're not quoting statistics. We don't even know what the real statistics are as to how many churches closed, who didn't have services, how many people quit the church, how many people were watching online. I mean, we just don't know any of that stuff. And
Well,
it's
and the reality,
really
nobody does. Yeah,
yeah,
nobody
and
knows.
this is a philosophical discussion as opposed to a well-researched and supported by data conversation. It really
Right.
is feelings and perceptions that
Correct.
we as people engaged in the modern world, we deal with lots of folks around the world. We talk to them, we listen to them, we teach, we train, we entertain issues, we get feedback, we get pushback, we get attacks, I mean, it's all there. But one of the main places that the two of us, Mike's, function is within the life of the church. The question is arising, how has this and other forces and factors in the modern age affected the church? When we look at the concept of the church, we're separating what we're calling the community, the living community of Jesus, or the living community of Jesus Christ, or the followers of Jesus, or the body of Christ, or the city of God, or that some organizations have taken those titles and branded them as their name. We are not referring to that.
Right. We're
We're
not.
referring to people without any kind of structure around them, no membership rules, no dress codes, no certain version of the Bible, just people who follow Jesus as a function of their life, as the kind of quality of their life, their bond, their relationships, not only vertical to God, but also horizontal to each other.
Right.
We're comparing that
Right.
to what we're calling the commercial church. Any denomination could be Catholic, it could be Methodist, it could be Baptist, it could be Episcopal, it could be informal, unstructured in terms of hierarchy, but it's the organized, visible commercial structure. They own property or lease somewhere. They meet for services that have a beginning time and an ending time. There's a column of power that we talked about in the last two
Yeah.
episodes.
And I was going to say, go back and listen to those, because that's really where a
Yeah.
lot of the genesis of this came out of in our discussions.
20 and
the column of
21,
power.
those are
Right.
really key into the column of power. The commercial church has within it a very clearly defined column of power. Someone's in charge. There's a committee that runs things. They have membership rules. They have classes. They rent material. They pay utility bills. There's a choir or music team that's defined from others. So that's all part of what we're calling the commercial church. It does commerce. It has statistics and budgets and things get paid. That's the commercial church. And our experience is, at least in America, and we're seeing it around the world, the commercial church is dying. Fewer people are going. The next generation of younger people is not interested in putting their butt in a pew or a padded seat. They're not going to focus their attention on the pastor or the video screen or the musicians on front. They're not interested in that. And there's a whole phenomenon that's occurring in the Christian world that are called the dones, D-O-N-E-S, people who are just done with it. And it doesn't mean that they're not Christians. It doesn't mean they're not followers of Jesus. It means they're done with the church. And that's done with the commercial church as we're describing. So our topic today is the community, the living community of Jesus Christ, the commercial church is dying out, but it does not really matter. And that's where the controversy comes in, because people in our field are so bonded, addicted, obsessed with the statistics and the growth patterns and the branding and all of that stuff that goes into the commercial church, as if that's the real church. And our podcast today is that that's actually not the real church, and it doesn't matter if it dies out.
And so, in defense of the commercial church,
you're defending the commercial church?
Yeah,
I thought this whole thing was to take away okay, I'm not irritated. I'm curious. Please continue. Stop laughing at me. Just continue.
Sorry. Yeah. Maybe defense isn't the right word. Is understanding.
Oh, it's not. It's clearly not. Pick a different
understanding of what's going on in so many of those settings. I get it. You and I both spent.
I don't get it. Do you get it?
Well, come on. You and I have spent an enormous amount of time in the structure of the commercial church over the years in our life. And we have participated in all kinds of craziness. And
everything about the commercial church is not automatically bad.
No. So, no, it's not. And so
it's not.
In understanding
it's
would
just
say,
dying.
Right. They would just say, well, because we're using these as tools so that people can come to faith and they can understand what it means to be Christian and yada, 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 yada. Our contention and my contention and your contention is I get that. But the moment you move to that direction, where does your focus truly go? It goes to
when you're focused. That doesn't. What are you talking about? When whose focus? Mine?
In the commercial church, when you go to marketing, when you go to the stuff, when you go to the tools, where does the focus go if you're the one that's producing that stuff, all under the guise of, well, we have to have a bigger building. We need more property. We need we need a bowling alley so that we can reach those people who are bowlers.
We don't really
We need,
need it, but we do want it. It's
exactly,
become a need. We've created a sense that we cannot do God's work unless we have a bigger building or new campus or more parking or a better internet system or something, that the work, the essential work, will fail if the commercial church is not thriving.
correct.
That's kind of the idea.
That is the idea. And therein lies the rub, because from the standpoint of getting lost, my phrase, getting lost in the weeds, as much as we want to try and say, well, this is what we're, the motivation behind this is all good. Well, yes, the motivation may be well and good. It's the amount of resource, time, and energy that you're giving to it versus being the living community of Jesus. And if what we're doing is we're siphoning off, there's only so many hours of the day you have, there's only so much relationship you can have, there's only so much you can do within a 24-hour period of a day. You are siphoning resource off that is giving it to the stuff of life versus the relationship with people and being the living community
Yeah,
of
but if there
Jesus.
wasn't a commercial church, how can you give your tithe? I mean, the concept of donating to a church for the work of the church is woven into the American fabric of our culture. That is how we know we're doing the right thing, is we make donations and the church does good stuff. The commercial church does good stuff. And so one of the challenges that we're seeing now during the COVID age is that quite a number of churches have not, they're just starting to open up again, but they have not had public services in their buildings except online or some kind of a electronic presence. And who's watching? Who's paying attention to that? Who's engaging? How does the body of Christ work? Those are all words in quotes.
Right.
How does the church exist even when it can't get together in the commercial endeavor? And we're at least positing the idea that if the commercial church dies out, that really doesn't matter very much relative to what God is doing in and through his people in this world. And the question then is, if there isn't a commercial organization that you can count butts in seats and noses facing forward and nickels in the offering plate, if you can't chart that, how do you know the church even exists? And what we're putting out for discussion is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. If you don't keep those statistics, if all of a sudden they're gone, nobody is counting Sunday morning attendance or worship attendance whenever you have it. Somebody just asked me, we're trying to find new staff at our local community right now, at our commercial church. And fairly often, the people who have expressed interest in being hired say literally this question: how big is your church? And I say 10,600 square feet. And they say, no, that's not. You know what I'm asking. How big is your church? What are your stats? How many members do you have? What's your Sunday morning average attendance? And I say 13 to 18. But our bigger service is Saturday. Oh, well, add them together. That's what I'm talking about. I say, well, you said Sunday morning. That's a specific statistic. If you ask for the average, I count up on my abacus all of the people that showed up, and I divide by the lines that I've got and find out how many beads are on each line. Is that going to tell you something? How many people are watching online? How many people watched the sermon that I preached 4 weeks ago? They watched it this week and it had impact in their life. Or they watched it again. They've watched it a second time, a third time, a fourth time. Does each one count? The problem is we're asking the wrong questions that cannot be answered by the
Exactly.
living community of Jesus Christ. They can only be answered by the commercial church.
Correct.
And
Right.
if my statistics show a 12% increase, what does that tell you? Now, if I have 8 people and I add 1, I've had a 12.5% increase.
Right.
12.5% increase sounds really good. If I've got a 30,000 person commercial church and I grow by 12, if I grow by 1, the number of zeros after the decimal point makes it so infinitesimally small. Still, one person is what we've grown by. One person really matters, but one person in 12 and one person in 30,000, very, very different in commercial value. So if I was to grow 30,000 people by 12%, we're talking 3,800 people have grown. How many churches of 30,000 grow by 3,800? The answer is, oh my goodness, that would be like, holy cow, that would be a huge, huge, huge growth. It doesn't happen. The
Right.
3,800 that grew in 12% at one commercial church, figure out all of the commercial churches in the region that lost those 3,800 people, and you find out the impact of the kingdom of God, of the community of Jesus, actually hasn't changed at all. All we did was move product from one shelf to another shelf, and there's
Exactly.
been no real change
Right.
whatsoever
Right.
in the actual work of the church, the living community, where in the commercial church, it looks like some are really doing well, and then others are doing really bad.
Right.
And during COVID, a whole bunch of them have closed, and not too many have opened, but we're going to see a real launch of new churches spurting up in the next 2 years because all the ones that, quote, died, those people are going somewhere. I mean, they're going to do something, or they've become dones that may actually still be in the living community of Jesus,
Right.
but not in the commercial church.
Right. And part of the dynamic of the commercial church in this age of COVID has been the flip side of that, of where the churches that have pretty much just kind of said, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and we're not going to follow anything, then they have their growth is by all the people who are grumpy that are mad at their own churches and they've just left. So now we're swapping sheep, if you will, since that's what we get to be called within the church, and that's seen as growth, but it's not making any changes. And so the issue then comes back to some interesting hypotheticals of what really would happen to the commercial church if certain things took place, or if we lived in the
That
kind
sounds
of
particularly vague. What in the world are you talking about?
well,
Hypotheticals of
I
the
I'm
commercial.
gonna get there. Let me get
Get
there.
there. Get there
I'm gonna
quicker.
get the
People
cheese.
are going to go get their coffee and they're not
No,
coming back.
no, they'll come back because they'll
Okay.
know
All
I'll have
right.
something important to say.
Well, hit
So,
pause, go get your coffee, and then come back.
so what would happen if churches no longer were tax exempt?
Ooh.
Uh,
Whoa. We went
I
from
told you
vague hypothetical to like set the church on fire.
exactly.
If churches were no longer tax exempt, what would be taxed in the church then? If the
So
tax
what?
exemption was removed?
And if your giving was no longer tax exempt,
Oh, if giving was counted as income
correct?
and taxed at state rates or federal rates,
Yes.
and the individuals donating would not get a reduction in their federal or state
Correct.
taxes because they had made donations to the church. Okay. How about properties and property taxes in states that have property tax?
So even in
Is
that
that a
setting, yeah, so both and or either or. What would happen if churches were property taxed? How would that, what would that do? Well, it would take a gigantic chunk of money out of the budget to be able to
would
sustain
commercial
property
church
taxes.
in America be able to function if its properties were taxed equal to other commercial properties?
No way. What do you do with places like downtown Manhattan?
Are there any churches that own property in downtown Manhattan?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. Pick on New York. What about downtown Seattle?
Oh, yeah, that's there too. There are several large commercial churches downtown.
Okay,
And
so those are
around.
few and far between. That who cares about that?
Oh, no. You're talking about huge places all over the West Coast in major cities.
But
Big
we're talking
churches.
about the little people. The
The little
church,
people
the
are
little
they got,
Methodist church, it has 9 people left, and they have a beautiful cathedral style building with stained glass windows that's worth $4.6 million. And those 12 people have got to come up with the property tax value for their property. It would destroy the commercial church. One of the questions is, would it destroy the church in America? And I think that's what we're trying to talk about.
Exactly.
If the fellowship of Jesus, or the community, the living community of people who call themselves followers of Jesus, would they continue doing the work of the body? Yeah, they sure. You visit your neighbors, you take care of the poor, and you stand up for justice, and you intervene in positive ways throughout your community. Can you worship? When this whole COVID thing hit and you had to have a mask on, you're not allowed to sing out loud inside a building because that could spread COVID. And the reaction of the commercial church was,
ballistic.
You are preventing us from our First Amendment rights of the freedom of assembly and worship, and that the church and that the government will not infringe upon the rights of worship. And we're saying, go ahead and sing your heart out, just don't open your mouth while you're doing it.
Or go outside.
Or go outside, meet outside. Or this has to do with a medical crisis that is months long, if not years long. But what we're saying is, it's not that you have no freedom to worship. It's you cannot sing and chant. And then people say, well, I'm going to do it anyway. Now, it's not just a Christian issue.
Oh,
right now, this week in India, there was a huge event with millions of people going for the purpose of religion.
I saw that.
To the Ganges River and dipping themselves in the river as a function of their religion. They're now calling a super spreader event, and that India, it has posted the number one the human record around the world of number of new COVID cases, and was something like 310,000 in one day.
I know.
So it wasn't people singing "Just as I Am" at church.
No.
It's a function of human religion that is a requirement or an essential or something obvious within the commercial religion that is creating that kind of real outcome.
Which I find to be incredibly curious, because I think I know a guy who said something about where 2 or more are gathered.
He didn't say 2 or more. He said 2 or 3.
2 or 3 are gathered. I'm going to be there.
Okay, so if we're going to parse that out, then Jesus is not with one at a time. That's what you're saying is Jesus has neglected the individual and one person doesn't matter, only two or three. Is that what you're saying?
I really dislike you a lot. I can't say hate on a podcast, can I?
On this one, you can, but you don't really mean it. That's a word of empowerment that's fairly intense. So you can say, okay, I am at a 31 with you. Great. You get that.
And if you don't know what that is, read our book, Why Do People Act That Way?
Yeah.
It's a commercial. Here we go. Yeah, 31 is like close
We're
to 40. There's 40.
we're ravaging the commercial church, so don't say we're having a commercial right now. That's a
Oh,
mixed
sorry.
metaphor that nobody who's watching this really wants to hear. It's not about commercial. So the challenge I think we're facing is that there is a true systemic change
Yes.
that is occurring, at least in American society, and more pronounced among the younger generation,
Yes.
the Gen Z, the millennials and younger, compared to the builder generation, which is now almost all gone.
Right. Traditionalists,
The
boomers, and the Gen X.
traditional, the baby boomers, which is really the kind of the larger part of the older generation, that singing hymns, with nothing wrong with hymns, having a choir, singing with an organ, having a music team, a body, a corpus of songs that are known by the congregation, a version of the Bible. Everybody turns, the pastor or paid staff at the
Right.
front with the authority and recognition. And then the system, the column of power says you are permitted to belong and engage what we're doing if you follow certain rules, certain expectations. They're one of the things that has driven this up to the point that we want to talk about on podcast is an event that I read about on the internet. And there's a woman somewhere in the kind of, if I'm treading on things that I don't really know about, somebody can fill in some of the details. But she was a member of a church, got divorced from her husband, tragic in and of itself for that, and declared on her social media she was in a relationship with another woman. And the church that she was a member of has a policy about that. And there is a refusal to allow participation or membership in that commercial church, that organized entity, when a person declares themselves as a lesbian or as a homosexual. So they sent her a registered letter, and she put that letter up on the internet that they have determined she is in violation and God has now condemned her. And so the church stands in the judgment seat of God and makes a pronouncement. That's all commercial church stuff. The question is, do they have to do that? Is that actually necessary? And in one form of the church, if we don't stand for something, then we stand for nothing. If we're not growing, then we're dying. If we fail to plan, we plan to fail. All those business terms and ideologies get brought to the church.
Are you in
And
bumper sticker? Are you in the bumper
yes,
sticker
yeah, I'm the bumper
business?
sticker man.
Are you? Cool.
That we have those aspects that seem on the surface to certainly be conventional wisdom. Well, of course, if we don't stand for something, then we stand for nothing. And therefore, the church must protect its boundaries, even at the cost of individuals to whom we say, You no longer belong. You cannot come in because you are, and now in the current age, because you're gay, or because you're black, or because you're poor, or because you're a child, or because you're divorced, or because you're married across racial lines or gender lines, or because one of you has a different religion, or you're no longer a member of this community. There are certain ways of establishing what the boundaries are and why those have become the boundaries. And in the community, the living community of Jesus Christ, none of those exist. A person wants to be a follower of Jesus, and you're gay or black or white or purple or rich or poor or on welfare or live on the street in the gutter, or you drink alcohol, or you're drunk all the time, or you're a drug user. You want to call yourself a follower of Jesus, he's going to take that up with you at the right time. And anybody else that says you don't qualify because of check the boxes, that actually doesn't apply anymore. In the living community of Jesus Christ, that concept, that truth, that reality can exist within the commercial structure, but it also can exist without a commercial structure. So that in any given community, I live in a real small town outside Rochester, New York. Mike lives in the middle of the desert of Washington State,
I do.
in what appears to be a carved pit known as the Columbia River Valley. It's actually quite beautiful out there. The Wenatchee is in a pit, and somewhat like an armpit, but it's different. So don't anybody from Wenatchee, particularly Mike, get up in arms. This is all tied in together.
Oh, I hope so. Will you
Yes.
get where you're going here?
Well, in Hilton, there are 7 or 8 or 9 churches. In Wenatchee, there's probably 700 or 800. There's a lot of them out there. And there are people that attend those churches, some of whom are in the living community of Jesus Christ. And some of them are just playing church, and they're there for whatever reason they have. And they're not connected to Jesus at all. But they go to church and they're whatever.
Right. Church people.
The reality is that all 7 churches in Hilton could burn down. All 7 churches in Hilton could be forcibly closed because of COVID, and the buildings are closed. The commercial churches are closed, but the living community of Jesus Christ just kept right on meeting, right on ministering, right on taking care of the poor, checking in on each other, showing the gifts and grace of Jesus constantly. We never closed. We never stopped. We never go to sleep. We're always the body of Christ. That has nothing to do, well, it has something to do, but it has very little to do with the commercial structure of the church of Jesus Christ. And in Wenatchee, the same thing is true. There's zillions of churches and tons of people that go, and there's megatons that don't go.
Right.
And we look at them as the lost, the outsiders, the non-Christians, the unbelievers. Some word gets applied that says they're disqualified, but only from the commercial church. They want to participate or be identified with whatever structure they have. They don't even read the Bible. They don't even know about the Bible. They've memorized the entire King James Bible. They read it in Greek and Hebrew. I don't care. But they're part of the living community of Jesus Christ, whether they are strong or weak, rich or poor, black or white, top or bottom, inside or outside, married or not married, gay or straight, that those restrictions don't apply in the living community of Jesus Christ, I think. And one of the reasons why we're saying that the commercial church is dying, but it really doesn't matter, is the growth or identity or vibrancy of the living community of Jesus may actually take over if the commercial church is driven out of existence, or at least into a culturally minimized role because of the factors that are in play right now. That would be interesting.
Mm-hmm. I think
And
one of
should
the
the
things.
government decide they're going to tax the church, can you imagine the explosion of
Oh,
both grief and rage that would
it would.
happen
Yes.
in America if all of a sudden the government decided to do that? And
Yeah.
the living community of Jesus Christ would say, yeah,
So,
so how
and
about
see
that?
what's
Wouldn't
part
that
of
be,
what's
that's interesting.
it would what's driving, I believe, this idea concept that we're talking about has a lot to do with the millennials and Generation Z. Because right now, what I see is that, our generation is slowly losing the power grip,
Our generation
slowly.
being the boomers.
The
You're referring to
boomers.
yourself as old.
Well, just you.
Yeah,
Um,
'cause I am older than you. I have 25 days more experience on this planet than you do. And that
yeah,
has given me quite an
it's
edge in the
it is
race.
significant. I know.
It
And
is.
you
In
remind
those
me frequently.
25 days, I mean, you never caught up. Just a
You remind
fact
me
of
free.
life.
You remind me frequently that you're the elder brother, and
I
I'm
am.
okay with it. I'm okay with that.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay, go ahead.
So
17 thoughts just went through my mind right there. So
I'm very much aware of what happened right there. So, but right now you have, Generation X is in the driver's seat in most churches, and they're driving what's going on. What's fascinating to watch is I read some. I mean, because I'm a social guy, I read some of the dynamics of church buildings and what people are building and what they're not building, and what the millennials and the Generation Z people are saying. First off, they're saying we don't care about the buildings. Second thing they're saying is if we have a building, we want someplace where we can unhook, be quiet, have a relationship that's on an intimate basis. We don't care about the smoke and the lights and the big screens and the big auditorium with everybody in there. Give me somewhere where I can take my coffee, I can sit down with three of my friends, and we can have a real discussion about what it means to
the
be Jesus.
challenge, though, is those dynamics that are the sound and the light and the experience. Churches spend an amazing amount of time, energy, and money in making those experiences
Right,
happen
right,
so that the church is effective in what it's set out to do. And I think what we're saying on this podcast is the church is effective at doing what it's set out to do. It's just that what it's set out to do is irrelevant
right.
to the living community of Jesus Christ. So you say, well, what they were concerned about where the environment is. I want to sit down with two or three of my friends and have some kind of fellowship or spiritual interaction, personal. Okay, at the local coffee shop. So that
And
becomes your
that
church. And
and
people
that's what
actually
they
say that. That's my church. The
and
bar is
yeah,
my church.
that's
The
what they're
bowling
doing.
alley, the
Exactly.
fire department, that's my church.
Right. And that's my point, is that right now the commercial church doesn't understand, and what they're seeing is this level of anxiety and frustration of millennials and Gen Zs, that they're tolerating it for the most part, but they're not engaging in it.
Well, they're tolerating it because in the column of power, the Gen Z is not at the top of the stack. There
Exactly.
are other people that are defining the rules and the
Right.
roles
Right.
so that the ones who are, and then the outflow from the church, from the commercial church, the outflow of people walking out the doors and not turning around and walking back in
Right.
is associated with their walking out on Jesus. And
Exactly.
here comes a great question. We may want to take this up another time because this is getting pretty long. Would Jesus go to church if he were alive today?
Mhm.
Or would he walk out and not come back?
Well, Yeah. Ooh, you really want to get people riled up, don't you?
But we're not talking about that today. We're going to leave that question. Maybe that's our next podcast. The community of Jesus is this one. And if Jesus came to church, would he walk out and never come back? That might be a good podcast for the next one. We don't really know what 23 is going to be, but we'll find out by the time we get there.
I think in trying to, if we want to kind of wrap this idea and this conversation up, and I'm hoping, folks, that, the 12 people who listen to us, I hope you'll respond and interact with us a little bit. You
Or
know,
share this on your own social media and get us in
right,
some serious trouble.
right.
Because if
Yeah,
people watch this,
dump it on Twitter, put it on
sure.
LinkedIn, get people upset about it, which is fine. It would be great to have some conversation in what people are seeing and understanding. And it's so fascinating to me as we watch this dynamic unfold, because in the age of COVID, as we continue to slowly get back to reality of normalcy, I guess, of what we would call normalcy in our country, the dynamic of the change has been significant in interaction with people. And for uh, the church has struggled greatly because it's been the commercial church and not knowing how to be able to deal with this whole thing of now somehow um, we can't be together in 20, 30, 100, 500, 2,000, 10,000 people, because we have defined that as being worship. We defined that as being what I really need in order to be Christian, and being convinced that you really need that to be Christian, not the living community of Jesus, but this is the living community of Jesus. I'm going, you have a real relationship with the guy that's 100 yards away from you on the other side of, 4,000 people sitting in this auditorium? No, um,
In the
you don't.
commercial church, that question has no meaning. You are in
Exactly.
the same place at the same time. That is
Exactly.
what matters.
That's right.
And
That's right.
and the idea that we're putting out is not that the commercial church ought to disappear. We're just simply recognizing that it is disappearing.
Great.
And it may resurge. And there's all kinds of reasons for the organized church to function within
Great.
our culture and within the
Sure.
world. But we're recognizing that people in large numbers are walking out and not turning around and walking back. And what we're saying is that does not really matter.
Right.
So
And I would leave you with this thought of, if you're saying, well, then how in the world are, if you will, in the church going to be reached? How in the world are we going to know if people really are, coming to faith? How are we going to know? And I would leave you with this thought is, if you look at the church in China, they have a living community of Jesus in the church in China. No one really knows. They just know that there are exponentially more and more and more and more and more living communities of Jesus throughout the entire country, and that the price that's being paid there is significant to be a part of that. But there's a gentleman that's a part of a group with me that actually met this morning, who has been helping people develop orchards in China. We live in the fruit world here, and so that's, he's not going over there, but he says what's really fascinating about the house church, the living community, small groups of people. We're talking 6, 10 to 12. That is the living community. He says it is in their DNA to share Jesus Christ with other people.
Not just
It
have
is
the pastor do that because the pastor's paid to do that. Like
no,
average normal people who don't really know what they're talking about can just share Jesus.
absolutely. He says he says it's just part of who
But
they are.
what if they do it wrong?
Ah, wow. Isn't that interesting?
Who
That might be
cares?
another topic. Who
I
cares?
mean, God pick up the pieces of a faulty communication?
Right.
One
So,
of the things you said was, how will we know how many people? We don't
who
need to
cares?
know. Who
And
cares?
and
That's that's that
there's
is
an
a
estimate,
commercial church question.
right? And that's what gets asked. So it's like, okay, estimate. Okay. Okay, great. Estimate. Who cares? But the estimate, 200 million and growing.
And that's a pure guess.
That's a pure guess.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so
Well,
let's
this has
stop
been good.
talking.
All right.
If you
Gripping
want to
reality.
write to us, write to
Go to
Myke at Gripping Reality and spell it Mike with a Y or Mike with an I, but don't write to Myke and Mike at Gripping Reality because that will go nowhere. It will bounce back. Mike at
right.
GrippingReality.com and send an idea in and post this video on your own social media and let's create a firestorm of people who are scratching their heads and saying, yeah, who cares?
Right.
Would that
All
be a
right.
firestorm? I don't
Could
think
be.
so.
All right. All right. Have a good day, guys. This has been fun.